Okay, yeah. Good evening, everyone. So we'll try again and hope that this time it will work. Apologies again for the technological problems. We're going to have to try and sort this out. I've posted on the chat for those who haven't had it. I've posted the handout link again, and sorry about the delays. Okay, so I wanted to look at the instructions of the building of the Mishkan and some of the kelim, some of the utensils that we used in the Mishkan, and look at one stream of thought in some of the details of these utensils and some of the symbolism behind them, and just try and use this as a chance to explore some interesting and deep ideas. So I've printed here on page 1 the descriptions of the instructions for the building of the Mizbeach, the altar, the shulchan, the table, and the Aron, the ark, the Aron HaKodesh, the holy ark, which contains the luchos, the tablets, and was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And there's a number of interesting stylistic differences between each of these utensils, but they also share various features in common, as we'll see in a few moments. So let's have a look at the Mizbeach. Pasuk, this is the first source, Pasuk Aleph, in chapter 30. V'osisa Mizbeach, you should make a Mizbeach, mikta katoras, to burn it an incense. As we know, in the Mishkan and in the Beis HaMikdash, indeed, there were two Mizbachos, there were two utensils, two altars that were used. There was the Mizbeach Hazav, the golden Mizbeach, which was inside the Kodesh, which was primarily used for the burning of incense, of katoras, and the larger Mizbeach of Nechoshes, of earth and stone, and in the Beis HaMikdash, and of earth and copper, bronze in the Mishkan. And here we're talking about the Mizbeach Hazav, the smaller Mizbeach made of gold inside the Mishkan. So for Osisa Mizbeach, you should make this Mizbeach. If it's a piece of Osazav, it should be, you should cover it with gold. That's Pasuk 3. Pasuk 4, or the end of Pasuk 3 first, I probably should have put that in bold in the English. You should make for it a crown of gold around about it. Now, I tried to print, I'm not sure so successfully, in the pictures, some images I found online of the various utensils, of the various kelim. And if you look, I think it's maybe clearest on the Aron, for example, on the upper lip, on the upper ridge of the Aron, you can see a zer, a crown, which rings the Aron. And if you look with care at the smaller Mizbeach, you can see at the bottom of the image on page 2, two Mizbachos, two altars. The smaller one, you can again see there's the zer, there's the crown around it. In the shulchan, I think it's not so clear cut. So in the kelim, in the utensils of the Mishkan, 3 utensils, the Mizbeach that we're just reading about, the shulchan and the Aron that we will read about, had a crown around the upper lip. And this is Pasuk Gimel with the Mizbeach. Finally, Pasuk 4, Pasuk Daled, Ushtei Tabos Zav, there should be 2 golden rings under this crown on the 2 sides. And the purpose of these rings is that they should be for staves or sticks to carry the Aron with them. And Pasuk 5, these staves should be made of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. So this is the instructions of the Mizbeach. Now, what we're going to be trying to look at today is understanding of some of the allusions or ramozim and symbolisms that exist in the structure of the Kabbalas. Of the kelim, of the utensils of the Mishkan. We read the utensils of the Mishkan, the description of the Mishkan, and obviously it's a very hard area for us to relate to understand what exactly is going on in these utensils, what their purpose is, and how they're meant to be used, and the symbolism. So we want to look at one stream of thought that notes the symbolism of these 3 utensils. So this is the Mizbeach. Let's look briefly at the shulchan. Shulchan again has these 3 features. The table again is made of wood, covered with gold. That's Pasuk 24. And again, it has a zer zahav soviv, a crown of gold around about it. And Pasuk 28, again, this utensil has staves, has poles which are used to carry it and transport it, because the whole Mishkan had to be mobile because it traveled through the desert. And then we get to the Aron. Now, ostensibly, the Aron also has these three features. Again, the Aron is instructed to be made, Pasuk 10. Pasuk 11, it has a crown of gold, Zer Zahav Saviv. And Pasuk 15 and 16, it has the instruction to have badim. However, uniquely, Lo Yosuru Mimenu. These badim, these poles, should not be removed from it. So the Aron has the same features of an instruction to make it, the poles that are designed for carrying it, the crown on around the top of the Aron, and the instruction, though with the Aron, which is unique to the Aron, that this should not be removed, that the Aron should not be, the poles should not be removed from the Aron. So this is one aspect of difference between the Aron and the other three utensils. And this is fairly well noted and discussed, and we will look at a range of perspectives around this, and no doubt over the years people have had different ideas linked to this. What's also interesting about the Aron, though, is that whereas the altar, the Mizbeach, and the Shulchan, the table, are clearly an instruction to Moshe to make, the Osisa, you should make. Now Moshe led a team under the guidance of Bezalel. So Moshe, ultimately, he's not the craftsman who's making himself, but nonetheless, Moshe is clearly the project leader. The Osisa you should make, the Osisa you should make. However, the Aron, the Osu Aron Shittim, they should make. So here, Moshe is being told that somehow the Aron needs to be more inclusive. They should make the Aron rather than it being you, your mitzvah. So these are some of the features that we're going to look at and try and see a range of Mefarshim that deal with this, and hopefully ends with a very interesting story also around this matter. Let's have a look at the Medrash and how the Medrash deals with this. Mipnei Ma, so this is the bottom of page 1, the Medrash Rabbah. Mipnei Ma b'chol hakelim ha'elek siva osisa ba'orin siva as Aron. So the Medrash Rabbah picks up on this textual detail. Why is it that with all the utensils it says you should make, and with the Aron it says they should make? Says Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda, the bottom of page 1. Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu, said HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yavo hakol v'yasku ba'Aron. Let everyone come and work on the Aron, Kedei, in order sheyizku kulam l'Torah, that everyone should merit Torah. So the Medrash is linking the Aron to the concept of Torah, and it's saying let everyone come and make the Aron. The Aron has to be a democratic keli. It has to be made by everyone. It has to be inclusive. It has to include everyone, because the Aron symbolizes Torah. Now, the background behind this Medrash is a statement of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, also from the Medrash, that's printed at the top of page 2. Says Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Gimel Kasarim Haim, there are 3 crowns. So the Medrash here is using the more normal word for crown, which is keter, a crown, as opposed to zer, which is also a crown. And Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is picking up on the feature that 3 of the utensils wear crowns. Why do these 3 utensils wear crowns? Says Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, because these 3 utensils symbolize 3 crowns that humans can aspire to. The Shulchan, says Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, represents the crown of kingship. Why does the Shulchan represent the crown of kingship? The Shulchan had on it the bread, the lechem haponim. The Shulchan is a table. It represents livelihood and sustenance. The primary job of a king is to ensure the flourishing of the country under his care. The job of the government is to ensure that everyone has food and is sustained and able to live. And therefore, the Shulchan represents the crown of kingship, of material wealth and prosperity and leadership. This is the role of the Shulchan. Now, the Medrash is building upon the fact that the structure of the Mishkan in some ways parallels the structure of a home. In other ways, it doesn't, but in some ways, it has the parallels to the home. It has within it the Shulchan, the table. It has a private area, the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies. And the Medrash therefore says this is the crown of kingship, is the Shulchan. Keseh Kahuna is the second crown, the crown of Kahuna status, the second sort of stature that is achievable for us human beings. The second crown that we human beings can wear is the crown of Kahuna, and this parallels the Mizbeach. The Mizbeach is the altar, the place of worship, of divine avodah, of service of Hashem, the place of sacrifice, and therefore the Keseh Kahuna, the crown of priesthood, is represented by the Mizbeach. And finally, the Keseh Torah, which is the Aron. the Aron is in the Kodesh Kodashim. It contains the luchos. It contains, according to the Medrash, also a Sefer Torah that Moshe wrote at the end of his life. But the pasuk is explicit that this is the Aron, which contains the luchos ha'edus, the 10 Commandments, the tablets of stone, which contain the Aseres HaDibros. These are contained in the Aron. The Aron is a box of sorts, and therefore the Aron represents the Keser Torah, the crown of Torah, and therefore is the third crown which humans can aspire to. So what the Medrash is saying is a simple idea in essence. What the Medrash is saying is that the Mishkan represents three peaks of human achievement, three peaks of spirituality, if you like, three areas and domains in which we humans can aspire to. The Mishkan is the source of sort of spirituality, and for that reason, three of the utensils have crowns to them to indicate that these are things that aren't just spiritual devices that exist in isolation in the Mishkan, but they are there to set goals or spiritual opportunities to human beings. So says Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and he's paralleling the more famous Mishnah in others, in which the Mishnah says the same thing. There are three crowns that humans can achieve, and the Mishnah adds, which is a conversation for another day, that the Keser Shem Tov, the crown of a good name, Ola al Gabeam, supersedes and trumps all these three other crowns. So whilst kahuna, priesthood and kingship is important, Keser Shem Tov is yet more important than any of these. Now, based on that, the Medrash is saying in its earlier comment that the reason why the Aron has this osu they should make rather than you should make is because the Keser Malchus, the crown of kingship, and the Keser Kahuna, the crown of priesthood, is not open to everyone. Not everyone can become a king, and not everyone can become a Kohen. In fact, even though perhaps at that time in history, right at the dawn of the Jewish people, it was to a degree open, certainly by the end of the 40 years in the Midbar, the Keser Kahuna had been allocated to Aron and his descendants forever, and the Keser Malchus was allocated to Yehuda and ultimately to David and Shlomo and their descendants. So, the Keser Malchus was allocated to Yehuda and to David and so on. So these aren't open to everyone. However, the Keser Torah, the crown of Torah, remains open and accessible to all people. And therefore, this is the first comment of the Medrash, that whilst you, Moshe, should make a sort of the other Kedim, this can be left as a sort of elitist project. When it comes to the Aron, the Aron can't be elite. It has to be open to everyone. For Osu, they should make. Everyone should be able to make this. Now, I don't know, and the Medrash isn't entirely clear, whether this had practical implications. In the actual making of the Aron, was there an opportunity for everyone to chip in a way that didn't occur with the Shulchan and Mizrach? Has anyone ever come across the source? I'm not aware. If anyone either live or online does find out a source as to whether this had practical halachic implications or not, I don't know. But this is how the Medrash anyway is symbolically reading it. Well, no, we know that Batzalel on a hands-on level didn't make everything, because first of all, he had an assistant, and secondly, at least in Chazal we're told about, for example, the weaving of the fabrics as being done by teams of expert weavers, and so on and so forth. So Batzalel was the designer in chief, or the craftsman in chief, but definitely not the one who made everything. Yeah. Yes, according to the Medrash, Moshe struggled to make the menorah, and it was made in a semi-miraculous manner. In the Psukim, this isn't entirely clear. Again, I don't know if this Medrash reflects unanimous opinion or not. So I don't know on a practical level if the Aron, if this achieves any practical results. But so says the Medrash. The Medrash understands this to be instruction for everyone. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, by the way, interestingly carries on and picks up on this unusual word used for crown, which is there, and also the unusual spelling of the words there, because normally a tseireh in this form, the there form, one would expect a yud, zayin yud reish. So he picks up on this feature, and he says that the way the there, the Hebrew words are used for crown, can be read. It can also be read as zar, as a stranger. And again, it's hard to know exactly what a medrash means, but it seems to be indicating, just have a look at the bottom of the box at the top of page 2, Loma nichtav zeh Why is it written with the zayin reish when we read it as zer? To tell you, if a person merits these crowns or a crown, they become a stranger. So I don't know if he's even picking up on the physical appearance of the crowns, because the crowns could be looked at as crowns, and they could be looked at as thorns or as barriers almost of sorts. But he's certainly picking up on the meaning of the word zer. And more usually, when you see the word zayin reish in the Torah, it means a zar, a stranger. And what he seems to be saying is that these crowns are double-edged swords. They can be used well, in which case they can be a crown. It can be the glory of a person that they are gifted with great wealth, or great spirituality, the kahana, or malchus, kingship, or indeed the crown of Torah. Someone can be a gifted Torah scholar, and this can be a crown of glory, or this can be a zar. This can be a source of distancing and estrangement, and creating a gap between themselves. And someone, I'll blur details a little bit. Someone came to speak to me fairly recently. Someone who had achieved, to their surprise, great prosperity in a sort of turn of events, which was completely unexpected. And they were struggling actually between, at the time I hadn't yet prepared this year, but and now I would say they're struggling between zer and zor. Is this great wealth going to be the cause of a crown of glory, or is this going to be estrangement? And with great gifts comes challenges. And I said to this person, you have the gift of becoming one of the great Baalei Tzedakah now, as well. It's a tremendous bracha, but also very daunting for this particular individual, and quite frightening as well. So this is the input of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, that we make a choice whether which sort of how we use this crown. I thought of this also as a little bit of a vart in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, because the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which, as I said, adds Kasa Shem Tov, says the following. It says there are 3 crowns: Kasa Kahuna, Kasa Malchus, and Kasa Torah, like it says. And then it says Kasa Shem Tov Ola Al Gabeim. The Kasa of a good name, the crown of a good name, rises above all 3. Now there's a contradiction then, Minei or Bei, internally in the Mishnah, because the Mishnah begins by saying there are 3 crowns, and then it lists 4 crowns. It lists 3, and then it says, and there's a Kasa Shem Tov which rises above them. And I was wondering if the point of the Mishnah is the Kasa Shem Tov Ola Al Gabeim. The Kasa Shem Tov lifts over all of those, meaning to say comes up over all of those, meaning it's the Kasa Shem Tov which determines whether these other 3 are crowns or a crown of thorns, whether they are a zer or a zar, whether they are genuine crowns, or whether they drag us down into distancing. So this is a first stream of thought in the Medrash, linked to the idea that the Aron is the seat of Torah, and the Mizbeach is the seat of Kahuna, and the Shulchan is the seat of Malchus, of kingship and material prosperity. The next sort of symbolism I want to look at, and then hopefully we'll be able to tie the two together, is a discussion around this unique mitzvah of not removing the poles from the Aron, not removing the staves from the Aron. And the Rambam is of the view that this is one of the 613 commandments, quite remarkable. And when we think of listing the 613 commandments, very few of us would spring to mind that one of the Tariag mitzvahs is the prohibition of removing the poles, the staves from the Aron. But this is the view of the Rambam. And at the bottom of page 2, he printed the comments of the Sefer Chinuch. Sefer Chinuch is a little bothered by this, and he says, 1 minute, I thought that anything that's included in the 630 mitzvahs are mitzvahs for all time, not just temporary mitzvahs. So as it happens, I think I've spoken about this in both my Wednesday share and my Sunday share not too long ago. But if you look in the Torah, there are many, many hundreds of mitzvahs. The Rambam is of the view that the only ones which make it into the list of 613 are those which exist for all time. So for example, the mitzvah not to go up the mountain of Sinai, not to go up Har Sinai, at the time of the giving of the Torah, is a commandment from Hashem, but it's not one of the Torah mitzvahs, it's not one of the 630 commandments, because it's not an eternal mitzvah, it's just a mitzvah for a short span of time. So this is the view of the Rambam. So why is the mitzvah of not removing the badim a temporary mitzvah? And he answers, because this is a permanent mitzvah. The Aron is a permanent feature of Jewish life, and the Aron is the Aron that was created here. Is the Aron that served in the first Beis Hamikdash, and unfortunately was then lost, concealed, put away, didn't exist in the second base of Mikdash, doesn't exist now. But that's because we, unfortunately, have lost the Aron. We don't have access to the Aron. But fundamentally, in and of in itself, this is an eternal mitzvah. This is a mitzvah that applies to all time and is a mitzvah that therefore should be counted in the Torah mitzvahs amongst the 613 commandments, even though we are unable to fulfill it because we have lost the Aron at the moment now. And of course, we aspire and hope that one day we will get the Aron back, and once again, the poles will be there. Now, carrying on from that, the Chinuch says, well, if the implications of this are that this is a permanent mitzvah, there's evidently something fundamentally inherent in this. And he says, why should we leave the staves of the Aron permanently in the Aron? Why should the poles be left permanently inside? Let's have a look at the top of page 3, where he explains the idea behind this mitzvah. Top of page 3 in the bold, Misharshei HaMitzvah, from the root of the mitzvah. Lefisha ha'Aron Mishkan HaTorah. The Aron is the seat of the Torah. It houses the luchas. Vehi kol ikrono kavadenu. It is our very amazing words. He says it is our whole ikka, our whole fundamental, and our whole honor, our whole glory. So if we ask, what is the glory of our people, of the Jewish people, the answer is the Torah, the Aron, which carries the Torah itself. We have to practice with Aron all honor and all glorification, all beautification with all our abilities. This is remarkable language from the Chinuch. The mitzvah giving honor to the Aron and the Torah it contains is we have to use all effort to give it honor and beauty. Therefore, he says, therefore we've been commanded, not to remove the poles of the Aron from it. Yes, we need to leave in a rush, and therefore perhaps out of hasslement, and rush, we won't check that the poles are properly in the Aron, and we won't be able to carry it properly, and God forbid it should fall. So the Aron, says the Chinuch, the Sefer Chinuch, has to always be ready to flee. If you really value something, something is vitally important to you, you always have it in your suitcase ready to run at any moment. Now, there's a sort of a beauty and also nostalgia and also sadness in the message of the Chinuch, because what he's reflecting here is unfortunately Jewish history, and for much of Jewish history, if you wish to be sensible, you always have your bags packed. And at a moment's notice, you are able to run. To this day, many of us will store our passports somewhere, convenient, somewhere, where they are. The Chinuch is saying, if that's your attitude, then the Aron always needs to be ready to flee. So the Aron has to have the staves, the poles left in it. So at a moment's notice, you can take the Aron. Because who knows when you'll need to run with the Aron in rush and hustle and chipazim, the same language used as when we left Egypt. And the Aron therefore always has to be prepared to go. So it's a remarkable halacha. The Mizbeach is an important thing. When you need to carry the Mizbeach, you put poles in it, but when you no longer need to, you don't. So when in the Mishkan, when they were traveling through the desert, it has poles, and when you park in the desert, it doesn't have poles. In the Beit HaMikdash, it doesn't need poles. But one item is so precious, it always needs to be accessible. It always needs to be in a suitcase. It always needs to be carryable. That's the Aron. Therefore, the Aron always has to have poles in it. You have to be ready to run with it wherever you go. And indeed, at least symbolically, this has, of course, been the course of Jewish history. Whenever we had to flee from place to place, the one thing that we took with us was the Torah. We took with us our Torah, and we carried that. It was portable. It was the ultimate portable entity which we carried with us wherever we went. So this is the message of the Chinuch and how he understands this. Yes. Yes, right. So the idea of the Aron being captured was untenable. The Torah has to remain permanently the property of Klal Yisrael. I mean, it's very, very interesting. I was speaking about this too in the students' Q&A. That the figure of Yochanan and Zakkai is in many ways perhaps the iconic figure in Jewish history who's associated with that portability of Torah. Because both in the stories the Gemara tells us about Rabbi Yerucham and Zakkai and in his actions that he created, he really, forgive the moshel, but I remember when COVID broke out and we decided to shut the shul. So we said, Ner Yisrael's campus goes online. Right, that was the idea. The campus went online. Now, Rabbi Yochanan took the Jewish people and moved us online. He made us into a virtual nation. We were the first nation to go virtual. We lost a homeland. We lost Eretz Israel. We lost a language over time. We lost the sort of apparatus of state and government and normal features of nationhood. So what keeps us going? So as Rav Sadiq says, the Torah became our portable homeland. So we went virtual. We had a virtual homeland. And who was the figure who molded it? No doubt the figure was Rabbi Yerucham Lebovitz. He was the one that set up the center in Yavne and eventually set up the shiur there. He created all the takanas of Mehera, Yabana, Beis HaMikdash, and everything else. So Rabbi Yerucham Lebovitz read history, and he took the Jewish people online. He moved them into their virtual homeland. We were the first people to upload our national identity into the clouds. That's what we did. And that's the chinuch message, that the Torah has to be portable and able to go anywhere at any time. So says the chinuch. Samson Raphael Hirsch says a different symbolism in this, and this is source 7, in which he takes a slightly different slant on it, and he also picks up on the budim being left in the Aron, and he says that this is to indicate that Torah doesn't exist only in one space. Torah is beyond Eretz Yisrael and beyond the kedusha and sanctity of the Beis HaMikdash and Yerushalayim, and beyond any place that we humans create or are given as makomas of kedusha. He says the Mizbeach only can operate in the Beis HaMikdash. The Mizbeach is tied to a geographical location. The Shulchan, which represents Malchus and the national identity of the Jewish people, and our ability to function with a king, with a government, again, that can only be in Eretz Yisrael. That's where we need to exist as a nation. However, the Torah isn't bound to the soil of the Holy Land. The Torah is everywhere. Material prosperity and national identity, Eretz Yisrael. Kahuna, Avodah, the Mizbeach, only in the Holy Land, only in Eretz Yisrael. Torah, not bound to any location, it's above and beyond any space and any area. So that's how he sees it. A slightly different angle to the chinuch. The point of the polls is not that Torah can be portable and safely transported anywhere, but to indicate to us that it's fundamentally an object not tied to space. It's above time and space. And therefore, it exists wherever we are and whatever we're doing. He doesn't spell this out, Rav Hirsch, but I wonder if it ties into a miracle which the Gemara identifies associated with the Kodesh HaKadoshim, with the Aron in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, it's beyond the scope of this shiur to go into the technical details, but the Gemara crunches the maths of the dimensions of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and it turns out that the Aron and the dimensions of how it fits into the Kodesh HaKadoshim don't add up. It doesn't make sense. And the Gemara says from this that the Aron is above space. It doesn't use up space in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, this is a very remarkable miracle. In other words, you could measure from the sides of the Aron to the walls of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and that would achieve the full span of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Aron took up no place in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The dimensions of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, if measured on the outside, would come to a certain measure. If you then measure on either sides of the Aron, you would have the same dimensions. So I learned this Gemara, and it's a very interesting miracle. But what's the point of this miracle? What's the purpose of this? I mean, how many people ever note this miracle? Perhaps the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, if he has time and energy at that point to take out his tape measure and measure dimensions. What's the point of the miracle, and how does this tie up into the sort of integral structure of what the Aron is? Why is this miracle occurring? It just seems a needless squandering of the miraculous. And as Rav Hirsch illuminated the idea for me a little bit, and I thought that maybe in line with Rav Hirsch's thinking, this is the point, that the Aron can't take up a geographical space, because if the Aron is the Kesser Torah, the Kesser Torah has to be beyond time and space. Mitzvahs can be linked to Eretz Yisrael. National identity and Malchus can be linked to Eretz Yisrael, but the Torah itself is not linked to Eretz Yisrael. So it's interesting that these two very different ideas of the chinuch and of Hirsch, they tie into each other, they feed into each other, the portability of Torah and Torah being above time and space. This is Samson Raphael Hirsch's idea. I want to look at a third explanation of the Badei Ha'aron, and then use it for a little discourse on and a discussion about what should be the relationship between Talmud Torah and financial support. which is a very important topic. A significant part of our tzedakah is used on the one hand to support Talmud Torah. On the other hand, what exactly is the hashkafic approach to this? Is this something appropriate or not? And how are we meant to relate to the idea that to ensure Talmidei Chachomim and Talmud Torah in Klal Yisrael, it demands financial support, which does come at the price of other important causes. Our people are remarkably and incredibly generous, and the level of tzedakah given is incredible. Nonetheless, there's a finite amount of resources, and money spent on Talmud Torah comes away from medical needs or poverty-stricken people and like. So says the Meshech Chochmah here in source 8. I've discussed the figure of the Meshech Chochmah before. Late 1800s, early 1900s, the Rabbi of Dvinsk, Rabbi Meir Simcha Cohen of Dvinsk, and someone who perhaps is the last figure in Jewish history to combine philosophy, Kabbalah, Halacha, Lomdus, a very, very polymath, really, a very broad range of Torah, and very few figures since then have mapped that sort of breadth of Torah. So he also picks up on this, and let's have a quick look at what he says. So the first thing is, maybe we'll just read in English just in the interest of time. The sages say, when he removes the poles, the Aron receives malchus, which is a way of saying that this is a lav, this is a mitzvah losase, this is a negative commandment about which there is the penalty of lashes or malchut associated with this. However, with respect to the Mizbeach, he says, the Pasuk says, the pole shall be when it is carried. So, and similarly with the Shulchan. So basically, he's pointed out this feature that when it comes to the Aron, they're not allowed to be removed, and when it comes to the Shulchan and the Mizbeach, it can be removed. Why the difference? V'nir al pi medrash. So he says the answer here based on the medrash, and now he quotes the medrash we saw before, so we're at the bottom of page 3 in the Hebrew. She'ha'aron romeis l'kesed Torah. The Aron symbolizes the crown of Torah. That is available for anyone who wants to come and take it. So this is the medrash that we saw, that the crown of Torah, the instruction is given in the plural. Everyone needs to participate in the building of the Torah. Now, how does everyone participate in the building of the Aron? How does everyone participate in Torah? Not everyone has the opportunity of learning Torah in the fullest way. Everyone should learn some Torah, but everyone is able to have a depth of appreciation of the vastness of Torah. Vinay carries on the Meshech Chochmah in the third last line on page 3. Vinay Talmud Chacham, the Torah sage, Sorich Saad B'Tomtei, needs support. That a Talmud Chacham needs a wealthy individual to put supplies in his purse. He's quoting the Gemara over here, and he references a fellow called Todos Ish Romi. I shouldn't have called him a fellow, evidently a great figure, Theodos, the man of Rome, who the Gemara speaks about as being an incredible Tomech Torah, an incredible support of Torah. Top of page 4, Obizeh Torah Mitzvah, and through that, the Torah of the Torah is established and able to be maintained. And then he carries on, as we picked up, that with the Aron there is the plural language, and he finishes off at the end of the final paragraph at the top of page 4. The final lines in the first paragraph at the top of page 4. The townsfolk of the Talmud Chacham obligated to help support the finances of the Talmud Chacham. And this is the halacha, by the way. This is paskins in the Gemara and paskins in the Rambam, that every town needs to maintain a kollel, needs to maintain a place of learning for Talmidei Chachamim. And then he says, for this reason, the poles were there. The poles are those that support the Aron. Those are the supporters of the Talmidei Chachamim. So what the Meshech Chochmah is saying in this paragraph that we just read is that the poles of the Aron symbolize those who support the Aron, the Tomchei Torah, and they need to be bound permanently with the Aron. One can never separate the two. They can never be separated. There is a fundamental, inherent link in the fabric of Torah in Klal Yisrael and the existence and maintenance of Torah in the Jewish people, that there needs to be a partnership. There needs to be a collective building of the Aron. How is the Aron collectively built? By those who are privileged and lucky enough to be Talmidei Chachamim, and by those who support Talmidei Chachamim. These two exist and coexist together, and must permanently exist and coexist together, and never be separated from each other. And both share the unique spot in the Kodesh Kodashim. Both relationships to Torah co-share the privilege of being in the Holy of Holies, one through being a Tomech Torah, through being a supporter Torah, and the other being through being a Lomed Torah, someone who learns Torah themselves. And it is a law, it is a prohibition in the Torah to separate it. Finally, the Meshech Chochmah says he calls it al derech hamuskal, a more rationalist approach. I'm not exactly sure what he considers more symbolic and what he considers more rationalist. Why he labels this as derech hamuskal. He says the final symbolism. This is the final paragraph in the Meshech Chochmah and the top of page 4. So it's the last paragraph before source 9. He says since the Aron carries its carriers, therefore the poles are not there to carry it. But it carries itself. Therefore, he says the poles shouldn't be removed to demonstrate that in the same way as the poles are unnecessary when the Aron is at rest in the Mishkan, so too whilst it's being carried on the shoulder, they are also necessary, therefore they shouldn't be removed. And as the Meshech Chochmah in this reading is basing himself on another medrash, that the Aron was not in truth carried, but it carried those who carried it. So the Kohanim who held the Aron were being elevated or lifted by the Aron itself, and therefore he says it's important. The poles of the Aron clearly were not there to help carry it, and therefore they shouldn't be removed, so that it is clear to every observer that just like they are unnecessary at the when the Aron is at rest, similarly they are unnecessary when the Aron moves. What the Meshech Chochmah doesn't explain over here is then why have poles at all? What he's saying is since we have poles, you may misunderstand the poles, God forbid, and think they're being used to carry the Aron, therefore leave them in always, even when they're not necessary, so everyone will realize they are a fundamental part of the Aron, not just a vehicle or a means to carry the Aron. But he doesn't explain what they're there for at all. It may be in that sense, these two explanations link with each other, and the Aron needs support and he needs poles because in a material sense, there is the need of the supporters of Torah, but in truth, the Aron is carrying itself. In truth, the supporters of Torah are being lifted by the Aron itself, which is carrying its carriers, and that's fundamentally the relationship is the opposite of the way it looks superficially. So that's a second direction. In other words, the supporters of Torah, the Badim, need to attach themselves to the Aron, even when they're not necessary, even when the Aron is at rest, in order to symbolize that actually there's a sort of symbiotic relationship over here. And whilst the poles are lifting the Aron is also lifting the poles and those who are carrying it. Yes.
Many people say what you actually are isn't related.
Yes.
You have to do your bit. Simply you've got to have the poles there, even though.
Yeah, so for those online, David is comparing this to the hishtadlus, the discussion around the responsibility on us to earn our living, in which there is a stream of thought in our thinking, which says that the real success in livelihood is not linked in truth to the effort one puts in. We need to put the effort in, but then in truth we are sustained and ultimately supported by Hashem, not in line with the effort we put in. Now, just in the interest of completion, there is debate around this concept. However, what isn't debatable and what isn't controversial is the fact that it is correct that we can put in all the hishtadlus we wish and nonetheless not be successful. And it is also true that much of our success, if not all of our success, comes from that which is beyond our control. We are gifted with health and with safety and with security from forces way beyond ourselves. We by a fluke of birth or a hashgacha pratis or a luck of history, we're born in a safe place with good healthcare and good security, and we ourselves have been given a good education, and therefore, so whatever one's relationship to shtadlus and without getting caught up in the debate around that idea, what certainly is the case is that our achievements are due to factors well beyond ourselves. That certainly is the case. Here, though, there is no debate. Meaning, whilst this is true that there's significant debate about the nature of hishtadlus, when it comes to the idea of tomech Torah, supporting Torah, this isn't a matter of debate. It is unanimous in the thinking of the poskim that Torah is something that needs to be supported, deserves to be supported, and ultimately elevates its supporters. Now, what is a debate around this area of supporting Talmud Torah, given this introduction? So I just wanted to spend a few moments sharing a Rambam. I'm not going to go through the whole Rambam, given that I'm going to have to leave a little early today, and I don't want to become overly caught up in it. But the Rambam says several points. The first point the Rambam says in Halacha 6 and Halacha 7 is that a person who aspires to the Keser Torah, the crown of Torah. So this is the Rambam in Halacha. This is not the Rambam in philosophical works or Mussar works. This is the Rambam paskening halachas in his halachic work, his Mishnah Torah, in Hilchas Talmud Torah, in the laws of Talmud Torah. He paskens that there is something called Keser Torah, a crown of Torah, that one should aspire to, or at least some individuals aspire to. This is the first point. So this is a halachic concept. If there are halachas about what to do if I wish to achieve the Keser Torah, the crown of Torah, and the first point he makes is a simple life. This is the Mishnah of his pasuk man of total, eat bread with salt, drink water in small measure, sleep on the ground, and live a life of toil in Torah. So to achieve success in Torah, one has to aspire to the simple life. Number 7, halacha 7, he says, if someone says, I will study once I've bought what I need, once I've succeeded in setting up my business, etc., then Torah will never be achieved. One has to make one's work secondary and Torah a fixed part of one's day. And this again, by the way, makes it to Shulchan Aruch, meaning one should be kveya itzim la Torah. One should have a fixed time for Torah, which is unbudgeable. And then you build everything else around it to fit in. It's, it's the analogy of the fruit bowl. If you have a full fruit bowl and then someone gives you a pineapple to fit into it, you won't be able to fit it in unless you squash the cherries and berries and the other fruit. If you take out all the other fruits, you put the pineapple in the middle of the fruit bowl, then you can fit around it all the smaller fruit and it will fit quite easily. So this is what I'm saying, that the Torah needs to be the keva, the kavua part, the fixed part of one's day, and then around it one fits one's other important needs. And again, this makes it into Shulchan Aruch. This is paskened in Shulchan Aruch. In Halacha 10, the Rambam says, nonetheless, that if one comes to the conclusion that one should involve oneself in Torah study without doing work and derive livelihood from charity, this is a chil Hashem. This is a terrible chil Hashem. And then he speaks very strongly about this. He says this is such a terrible abuse of how things should be, that such a person has no chelek in olam haba. And then again, he mentions the concept of Keser Torah, the crown of Torah. And he says this person is using the Keser Torah, they're using the crown of Torah as an axe to chop with. They're using the crown of Torah as a means of earning a living. This is completely inappropriate and unacceptable. Then he says in Halacha 11 that it is a great quality, ma'ala gadola, it is a great quality for someone to support themselves through their own efforts. This is a quality, a ma'ala, a quality of practice. Now, the reason I've presented these Rambams is because the Rambam is often misquoted or quoted out of context, in which it appears as if the Rambam has a universal objection to the idea of supporting Torah. And Torah shouldn't be supported. It is wrong and inappropriate for someone to take tzedakah for Talmud Torah. Having seen the Rambam in context, however, we see this isn't what the Rambam says, and the primary commentators on the Rambam, such as the Kesef Mishnah, correctly, and the Kesef Mishnah doesn't need my agreement, but correctly read the Rambam as saying a point of more nuance. And when I mentioned the Kesef Mishnah, he's the primary and senior commentary on the Rambam. He's also a figure who we know from another context, because the Kesef Mishnah was authored by Rabbi Yosef Cairo of Tzafat. Of course, he's the author of the Shulchan Aruch. So this isn't just a sort of random comment in the Rambam. This is the primary reading of the Rambam. And as I said, in Halacha 11, the Rambam says, it is a maila, it is a quality to earn your own way. Now, in Halacha 10, I thought he said that anyone who takes support for Torah is a terrible chil Hashem and has no portion in the world to come and has abused the Keser Torah. What a terrible thing. So we have a shiur, a contradiction in the Rambam, and a contradiction to the sources we've seen till now, which view it as almost an integral part of the functioning of the Jewish people, that there's the Aron and the Badei Aron. There's the Aron, the seat of Torah, and there's the supporters of the Torah. And the Kesef Mishnah mentions a number of distinctions over here. The first point is, the Rambam here says, he's talking about someone who is using their Torah to earn their livelihood. And now there's someone who is using their desire to learn Torah as a means to earn a livelihood. This is the problem. It doesn't mean to say that if someone is learning Torah, they shouldn't be deserving recipients of tzedakah. It is wrong for the Talmud Chacham to demand support and use their their ambition to learn Torah as an axe to chop with and to earn a parnasa. He says someone who decides that they should learn Torah and not engage in any work and sustain themselves from tzedakah. This is what is a terrible chil Hashem. But the idea that we have an obligation to support people who are Tomkei Torah and that they are entitled to accept such support is not a problem in the language of the Rambam. More than that, the Katz Mishnah points out that the Rambam brings a number of rayos, a number of pieces of evidence for this in his Perush Mishnayos. And in the interest of time, we haven't read his commentary to the Mishnayos. The Rambam says the same idea in his commentary to the Mishnayos, and he points out that many of the Torah sages that we knew earned their living. And the Katz Mishnah points out that this doesn't mean that at every stage of their career they earned their living. Hillel, of great fame, the leader ultimately of the Jewish people, earns his living as a woodman, as a wood chopper. And we're told, of course, the story of Hillel, one day being unable to pay his fee to attend a shiur, and he lies on the roof listening to the shiur and gets snowed in and freezes and is revived and so on. And the Katz Mishnah makes a simple point that nowhere in any of these sources are we told that when Hillel ended up as the Nossi, the head of the Sanhedrin, was he still working as a chotiveitim, as a woodchopper. He says, on the contrary, this has been quite ridiculous. What a waste of the abilities of the leader of Klal Yisrael if Hillel needs to work the whole day chopping wood and is unable to function as the Nossi. He says this is a ridiculous suggestion. So all the Rambam is saying is that the beginning of the career of Talmidei Chachamim, when they haven't yet achieved an ability to give to Klal Yisrael, for them to embark on this career, almost to call it as a career, as a Chil Hashem, to embark on this as a means to earn a living, this is something inappropriate. But the idea that someone who is a necessary for Klal Yisrael, as a Rosh Hashiva, as a Maggid Shiur, as a Talmid Chacham, as a teacher of Torah, shouldn't be able to accept support in order to allow them to do so. This is not the intention of the Rambam. And then the Kesef Mishnah makes 2 or 3 further points, and I'll just mention them briefly. He says the truth is, no matter what the view of the Rambam is on this matter, in halacha we don't always pass like the Rambam. He doesn't say this, but he says, I am the author of the Shulchan Aruch. I take the Rambam very seriously, but in Shulchan Aruch I pass like the consensus view, and this certainly isn't the consensus view of the majority of commentaries. If the Rambam meant anything more extreme than that, moreover, in halacha, minhag has great weighting, and if we look at the minhag of Klal Yisrael, we see that Klal Yisrael has always supported Torah. And finally, he says, were we to follow the view of the Rambam, and in what I think, says the Kesef Mishnah, is a misunderstanding. But even if you want to argue with me, and the Rambam objects to any support of Torah, then we would be left bereft of Torah. Klal Yisrael needs the ability for even its young scholars at the beginning of their journeys to be supported so that they can engage seriously in Talmud Torah and produce the next generation of poskim and Rosh Hashiva and the like. So says the Kesef Mishnah, the Rambam, and therefore, as the Meshech Chochmah says, the budding, the poles need to be integrally attached to the Aron. I want to finish off just with a very fascinating story that I happened to come across. And unlike many Gadol stories, I know for sure this story is true because it's penned by the Gadol himself, and it's a remarkable story. And the background to this, I printed this in source 10, and it's an absolutely amazing little episode. There was a great man, called Rabbi Yerucham Lebovitz. He was the author of a sefer called Das Chochmah U'Mussar. The very brief background of this figure is he lived, born in the mid 1870s. He died in the mid 1930s, so not much over 60. I think he was 63 when he died. He was a leading student of the students of Rabbi Zobin, the founder of the Mitzva movement, the ethical development movement that arose in Lithuania in the 1800s under Rabbi Zobin. And he was a leading Baal Mussar, a leading teacher of Mussar, and ended up actually working as the mashgiach in the Mir yeshiva in pre-war Europe. He was the Rebbe, he was the teacher, by the way, of many famous figures, including Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, including Reb Shlomo Wolbe, many of the famous Reb Shimon Schwab, if you read the life story of Reb Shimon Schwab, Reb Abba Berman. He was the teacher of a whole generation of leading Torah scholars of the next generation. And he was a mashgiach. He was a proponent of the Muslim movement. He was famed in particular for his sort of depth of intellectual insight into psychology and Mussar. In fact, his sefer was known as Das Chochmah U'Mussar, the knowledge of the wisdom of ethical development. So he focused particularly on a sort of intellectual understanding of character development. Now, they've collected an archive of his letters that he wrote, and you can see I have a copy of his letters. And I was browsing his letters and came across a remarkable letter. Now, unfortunately, I don't know the historical context of this letter. The letter was written Tov Reish Peitas, which is 1928-29, and it was written to someone who he evidently holds in enormous esteem, because he's very, very hesitant and tentative in this letter. And he opens the letter with titles of kavod and honor, which certainly Rabbi Yerucham didn't use easily. Nowadays, there's perhaps been inflation in titles that's given out. But Rabbi Yerucham calls this man a prince of Torah, the shepherd of the Jewish people, a great genius, etc. He speaks to him throughout the letter with enormous honor. It's also clear that this figure is senior to Rabbi Yerucham Lebovitz. He's older than him. And it seems that this figure wanted to retire from Torah leadership and was weary, was worn out. Now, from the context of the letter, it's clear what has worn out this figure. This is a leader of East European Jewry. I'm not sure who this leader is. I did want to email one of the Jewish historians and ask if he knows who this leader is, but it's anonymized in the letters. They've cut out the name of the figure. And the reason they cut out his name is because Rabbi Yerucham writes to him very modestly, but very sternly and strongly. And he says, you have no right to abdicate your post. You have a responsibility to keep up, to keep working hard. You can't just retire from your role. You have things to do. It seems this figure was worn out by the stress of the terrible poverty in East Europe and the constant communal affairs and so on, and wanted to step out of East European Jewry and just perhaps just retire and I imagine sit in a corner and learn. He wasn't meant to waste his life, but he has had enough of leadership. It also seems in the letter that actually he was thinking of moving to America. So this is 1928-29. The American community was wealthier, and it seems he could go there, be anonymous, and just sort of step back from a role, or perhaps teach some Torah there, but without this constant battle. Again, in the context of the letter, it appears he may have had some opportunity of teaching Torah there, because they've had Torah in America where he was being supported, and he could just get on with his job and teach Torah without any of the weight of responsibility of communal leadership and the terrible affliction of poverty that existed there. So Rabbi Yerucham writes a long letter in which he says this is outrageous, this can't happen, this is not unacceptable, you're shirking leadership and so on, and he writes to Now, in the middle of this, he says, the truth is, I have to confess, there was a time in my life when I also considered this. I'm a younger man than you, but I also had enough. It seems it was terribly difficult being a leader of East Europe at the time. And he says, I didn't know what to do. And then he said, and I just want to read the second line at the bottom of page 5, the second line of the main paragraph. We'll start from the beginning of the main paragraph in the letter. I rely on his, i.e., the person writing to great modesty. I want to tell you a story of when I was in Lithuania. I had thoughts to leave our place, the Yeshiva Mir, where I was a leader, to just go and settle in Kelm and live there without all the stresses of leadership responsibility. I kept on being delayed. At one point, I threw the famous lottery. So this is an allusion to the Goral HaGra. Now, Lithuanians are generally rationalists. They don't engage too much in mystical practice. Nonetheless, there is a tradition in Lithuania of a lottery based upon a tradition from the Vilna Gaon. And the way the lottery works, to cut a long story short, is it's a series of specified random moves till eventually one opens a chumash at a random place and sees what the pasuk says at that particular juncture in that place, and is able to read into that pasuk important messages. And there's many famed examples of this, including those of you who are familiar with Rabbi Aryeh Levine's life, and Rabbi Aryeh was the rabbi of the prisoners. Again, there was a terrible story in which bodies were unidentified, and he used the Goral HaGra to identify them. There's many very, very interesting stories around the concept of the Goral HaGra. So very interestingly, Rabbi Yerucham Lebovitz through such a Goral, and he says, I opened my chumash and I arrived at an amazing pasuk. I was unsure, do I keep up with my role of supporting Torah learning, being an educator, being a leader in Yeshivas Mir, when it's just, I can't cope with it anymore. And he says, which pasuk did I open up with? So at the end of the second line, I threw the Goral HaYaduah, the Nothali pasuk, and it fell on a pasuk, Shliv Halti Mirais. I was shocked to see this. The Gam Chiddush Gadol and Chadash Lima pasuk, and I achieved great insight from this event. V'zeu v'tabos ha'aron yabadim le'yasiru menu. I opened my chumash and I turned up at the pasuk of do not remove the poles from the Aron, and understood what I was being told. I'm one of the poles in the Aron. I've been given a position of leadership, of supporting the Jewish people. Here, he's not learning Parshat as a financial supporter. He's learning the explanation as a a supporter because of the leadership role I have, or because of the abilities I have, and the qualities of support I can give to my brothers and sisters, the Jewish people. And it was clear to me that the message of this pasuk was, I'm unable to retire and step back my role, because the Poles have the job of staying there. If you find yourself in a position as a supporter of the Jewish people, whether through one's finance, if that's where one's been blessed, whether through one's knowledge and resources and ability, whether one's a volunteer as a gabber in a gemach, in a charity, it's a job for life. Badei ha-shulchan, the Badei ha-Aron, the poles of the Aron can never be removed. This is what Rabbi Yerucham Lebovitz understands as the message of the prophet. Very, very fascinating letter and fascinating story. So I will stop there for now and wish everyone a good night. And as always, thank you so much for joining.